Hi everyone, welcome to today's National Teen Book Club broadcast with me, Sophie Ann Savitry from the National Teen Book Club team. Thank you so much for joining us for our author Q&A, which will last around 45 minutes.
Yes, our speaker today is Benjamin Dean. Ben is a full-time author with a background in celebrity journalism. He's interviewed a host of glitzy celebrities and is often tweeting about famous people as well as LGBTQ plus culture. Ben's written YA thrillers as well as middle grade and children's books.
So this session is the second in 6 author talks, which are linked to a hero read for the term, Cuts Both Ways by Candice Brathwaite, and its curriculum link, Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare. So Ben's YA books are scandalous thrillers, and like in Cuts Both Ways, the protagonists learn new things about themselves and others while navigating different environments, people, judgment, prejudice, and loss. Ben's latest book, or upcoming book, I should say, This Story is a Lie, is part of the World Book Day lineup of books available for £1.
So we're going to speak to Ben now about his books, recommended reads and career. And we'd love for you to put your questions forward. I think we've had some through already. You can submit questions by scanning the QR code on screen now or by typing in the code into slido.com. You could also type them into the Q&A function on this webpage underneath the stream. You can join in with your questions at any time, and please do also let us know via the Q&A function if you're experiencing any issues with the stream so we can try to help.
Hi Ben, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, how you doing? You all right?
Good, thanks for being here. So our first question, we're going to get straight into it. Please, will you tell us a bit more about your YA books?
My YA books are always a bit salacious, very scandalous. They usually take place in quite big settings. So for House Die Famous, we've got Hollywood, and for The King is Dead, we've got Buckingham Palace. And then for This Story is a Lie, which is my upcoming £1 World Book Day book, that's set in a very privileged academy where there is a very big competition coming into the school trying to pick a winner, and there's an anonymous blogger who's trying to reveal secrets about our main characters as the story progresses.
Ooh, so what drew you to the thriller genre?
I think I love trying to figure out a twist before it's coming. You know that when you read a thriller that you're going to be introduced to a twist of some kind. You know that there's going to be a lot of red herrings, a lot of evidence thrown at you. And I like the feeling of being a bit scared, but in a safe place. I mean, I something about watching horror movies and thriller movies makes me feel on edge, but I know that I'm still safe. So writing them means that I get to kind of do that same thing, but for other readers, and I get to feel a little bit evil when I do it, which is quite fun.
Talking about being scared as well, your book titles are pretty bold, they're attention grabbing, they're quite shocking. How do you come up with them? And do you find that having experience of writing headlines as a journalist helped?
I can't lie, it was not my strong suit when I first started being an author. I think it took me 4 books until I named the book. I think my first 3 were named by my publisher because I had no idea what to call them. You know, when you're an author, I think you end up publishing have an idea about what they want to call it because they know the market, and authors have an idea of what they want to call it because it's their book, and usually you end up meeting in the middle. But I will say that for House Die Famous, we had one title which I really didn't like, and it wasn't my suggestion. And I was like, right, I need to think of a better title. And I think writing headlines as a journalist, and in particular a celebrity journalist, really helped because you're always looking for the most salacious, scandalous type headline to draw readers in and to click your article and to read what's going on. So I kind of brought that skill set into making the title for House Die Famous, and it took a while. I was toying with some puns to do with fame. You know, there was a lot of famous last words and dead famous, etc., etc. But finally, I accidentally wrote down House Die Famous. I don't know how it was an accident. I was just typing, and I was like, "Oh, I didn't mean to put that." And my agent was like, "Stop! What did you just say? That is great. Go back." And ever since then, I've named all of my books so far. So this is, I'm on a good streak. So let's hope it continues.
Oh, interesting. Right. Well, I'm sure we're going to come back to all of the things you just raised there. But we've got a great question first from St John Bosco Arts College, who are interested to know, what books did you read as a teen?
Oh, as a teen, I often read Up. I would sneak like some of my mum's books away. But one book in particular that was a YA book that I absolutely adored when I was growing up was Noughts and Crosses by Mallory Blackman. I think that book had the biggest impact on me as a teenager, as a reader, and as a writer. I think it was the first time I'd ever seen books with characters that looked like me and were kind of central to the story, weren't just a sidekick or a side character. And reading that book by a Black author made me realize that the stories that I wanted to tell, I could maybe tell them and get them published at some point. I think that until I read that book, I wasn't really aware that being an author was a career choice. I think I just thought that books just fell out of the sky, which is silly to think about in hindsight. But I just didn't think that people wrote them. And if they did write them, I assumed that they were a certain kind of person. I assumed they were much older than I was, that they were probably white, because most of the stories I read centered around white people and white characters. And Mallory Blackman was the first author that I read where I felt like, oh, this leans closer to me, and maybe I can turn some of the stories that I imagine in my head into books in real life. So yeah, I would say that was a really big pivotal read for me when I was growing up.
Thank you, Ben. And we've had a question from Albert from Thurfield School. Have you ever had writer's block?
All the time. Every day of my life, there's writer's block. I think it took me, some authors will say that writer's block does not exist. I agree a little bit, but also I don't. Writer's block, when it is in your head and you just feel like you can't get words out on the page. You feel like you can't figure out what's happening next. You can't get things straight in your head. I'm someone who, the way I deal with writer's block is I shut my laptop and go. And I know that that's maybe not the best advice to give people, but I often find that if you've got writer's block, that you're maybe too zoomed into the story and you need to take a break and you need to zoom out a little bit. So when I have writer's block, which I get frequently, like I said, I get it day in, day out. There's a day here and there where I'll feel like everything's flowing, but it's very rare that happens. I'll go for a walk, I'll go and grab a coffee, I'll talk to some friends, I'll just get away from my laptop for a bit just to kind of reset myself. And you never know what inspiration is kind of lurking around the corner. So I like to just get up and leave and let my mind wander. Usually it gets sorted, like an idea will come to me in the most inconvenient place. Like I will be trying to fall asleep, or I'll be in the shower and I'll be like, I have to do a mad dash to try and grab my phone without slipping. It's just a lot to deal with. But writer's block is very, very, very prevalent and is a very common thing. I think every author goes through writer's block.
Well, I was going to ask you about your journey to being published, but before that then, since there are obviously such kind of tricky, difficult moments you have to push through, what is it you love about writing, and why did you want to be a storyteller?
I love stories. I love reading stories. I love writing stories. There's just something that I often liken it to playing The Sims, which is very silly, I know. But when I was growing up, I loved playing The Sims because you got to create your own little worlds and your own houses and your own people and your own relationships. And as an adult writing books, I feel that like I'm kind of getting to play my own version of The Sims and do in that book whatever I want. Something about letting your imagination just run wild and run loose and see what you can come up with makes it so exciting. And there's nothing more pleasing and satisfying than getting to the end and typing the end on a story and knowing that you did it. I think I won't sugarcoat the fact that writing a book is easy. Some books are easier than others. I've had books that kind of seem to just fall out on the page and were relatively smooth. But usually a book takes 18 months to write and edit. And that's probably quite a short turnaround. For me, that's just a turnaround because I'm working to a contract and a deadline. But I think that something about getting through the hardships and getting over those obstacles and getting to the end and being like, I did it. I don't know if you can see, it's a bit far away over there, but I've got some of my books on the shelf back there. And when I see those books as like finished, published books, that are published all around the world in countries that I don't live in and have never even visited before, I get a sense of pride. And that's something that I always hold dear to me, that I get the chance to do that. So the goods definitely outweigh the hardships of writing.
That must be so surreal to see, but also so lovely. We wanted to ask you about your journey to becoming an author and also your work in journalism. So how both led into each other and any transferable skills as well that you feel have helped you along the way.
So I always wanted to be an author since I was in year 2. I think I wrote my first story. I wrote a retelling of The Three Little Pigs, which, I mean, it was just a copy and paste of The Three Little Pigs in hindsight, but at the time I was really proud. I just loved creating stories. I loved writing. I realized that it was something that I could do. And it was something that I really love to fall into, because it's a bit of an escape. When you write in your own story, the world around you can be a dark place sometimes. So sometimes you need that escape. So writing, I really found that escape. But when I got to my later years in school, in secondary school, and you start thinking, quote unquote, realistically about what you want to do. I mean, I think being an author is a very realistic career goal, but it can look like a mammoth task to try and figure out how to get into publishing. And so I knew that I wanted to write, and being a journalist was something that I loved reading the weekly kind of tabloid gossip magazines, because my mum used to buy them and I used to kind of flick through them and be like, oh, what's going on here? So I kind of felt like I had a natural writing ability for journalism. So I went to uni in Manchester and had the best 3 years of my life, and learned the trade of writing different mediums, whether that be articles or creative writing, short stories, poetry, etc. And when I left, I was very lucky to land an internship at BuzzFeed back in 2015. I think I graduated university. I'm getting a bit older now. But yeah, it was a very fun 7 years I was at that company, and being a celebrity reporter meant your day was never the same. You know, there were some days where you were just writing the news that had happened overnight, but there were other days where you would be going out to interview celebrities in fancy hotels, and it was just a lot of fun. I really, really, really enjoyed it, and I think it translates to my work now, because I get a feeling of what readers want. There's no waffling in journalism. You kind of have to kind of get to the point and keep your reader attracted to what they're reading. And when I'm writing, I often think about, what does my reader really want? What do they really enjoy? What do they really want to get out of this? And as well, it makes me write quicker. I think writing to deadlines as a journalist, everything in journalism is due imminently. It's like, you've got a deadline. Other publications are going to be writing about the same thing. We need to get there first. And so writing quick has been a translatable skill to being an author, because now I think I write relatively quickly for an author, I think.
So there will have been a lot of changes since you started out in journalism, sort of coming up to 10 years ago now then. Do you have any advice for young people on the call about breaking into that line of work?
My advice is to find a niche of journalism that you really love and are passionate about. I mean, there are like your general news beats of journalism where you're reporting on general daily news in the country or worldwide, globally. But finding something within journalism that you yourself are very passionate about. For example, I love celebrities and pop culture. That is something that I personally gravitate towards, whether it's on Twitter or on social media in some way or another. I just love keeping up with what celebrities are doing. I find them absolutely fascinating. And so being able to turn that into a job in journalism where I was writing about celebrities and pop culture, it never felt like work. It felt like, yeah, there were hard days, but I just loved doing it so much that it felt like I was getting paid to do what I would have done for free online anyway. So it was very fun. And now as an author, I often think, like, I'm not a journalist now, but if I were to become a journalist, I love tennis. Tennis is like my really big hobby. I play tennis all the time. I'm playing tennis after this. I'm running outside to go play tennis in the cold. And I love the idea of being a tennis journalist, for example, and following the tennis tour around the world. So finding your niche, whether it's movies, music, sports, a particular sport, whether it's politics, just something that really makes you interested in what's going on, and it will make working a lot easier, because being a journalist does have its tough days. News can be quite hard to look at sometimes, but if you're doing something that you feel like sings to you, then it will make the job much, much easier.
Thank you. And you spoke there about celebrity culture being inspiration and an influence on your work. What about TV shows and film? Do they inspire you in any way? We saw a comment that The King is Dead. I think you made this comment yourself. Is Gossip Girl meets The Crown. So can you talk to us about your inspirations across
Yeah, I
storytelling?
find that one of my favorite things to do is to kind of ignore the quote unquote stuffy advice and like advice that you feel like is looking down on other storytelling forms. I feel like I find inspiration from absolutely all forms of storytelling, whether it is TV and film, whether it's poetry, whether it's video games. I think people think that video games are like there's a cliche that you're wasting your time playing video games and they're not doing anything for you. But I mean, video games are a form of storytelling, and they're often really interactive and engaging forms of storytelling. So when I play Fortnite, for example, or Tomb Raider, I'm thinking off the top of my head, you're following a story, or you're seeing things that can really just spark something in your mind when it comes to writing. For me, I mean, I love movies and TV and music. I find a lot of inspiration in music. So I listen to a lot of Billie Eilish, for example, and you find that lyrics can really trigger something in your mind. Like there was a Billie Eilish lyric, my Lucifer is lonely, and I remember being like, oh, that's so interesting as a concept. And I kind of used that as a inspiration for my third middle grade book, which was a fantasy about demons. And I just really love finding something that really hooks you in. So yeah, for The King is Dead, clashing together ideas that you don't think would ever go, i.e., Gossip Girl and The Crown. They're completely opposite. Even in terms of TV, The Crown is quite proper TV, and Gossip Girl is kind of considered to be lowbrow entertainment. But clashing them together was so much fun, and it's advice that I give to everyone when it comes to writing. If you're ever stuck for an idea, think about the things that you really, really, really love, things that you really love to watch, things that you really love to listen to, and clash them together with something else that you also really love, but maybe they wouldn't go together usually, and see what kind of stories you can make in that clash. Yeah, I do it all the time, and it makes me very excited when I figure out a new twist on something that already exists.
Oh, that's great. That starts to move towards a question, well, two questions really. We've had from Albert from Thurfield. We've had some great questions from Thurfield last week as well. We've got a few others, so thank you. Keep those coming. So one of them was, where did you get the idea for your first published book? And the other is, have you ever taken inspiration from any other books? So they're both from Albert there.
The inspiration for my first book, so my first book was a middle grade book called Me, My Dad, and the End of the Rainbow. And I was never meant to write that book at the time. I had ideas for other books, but that wasn't really on my radar. And I kind of accidentally fell into it, and it landed into an agent's lap. And I was like, oh, okay, things are moving, so I have to follow the story. But the inspiration really came from that because I love pride. Pride as in LGBTQ plus pride. Being able to experience pride as a teenager and then as an adult. I really love the pride and the joy and the happiness and the celebration that happens at a pride event, and it made me like want to feel that all the time, and I wanted to be able to encapsulate that feeling in a book. And so I wanted to be able to kind of give pride an accessible introduction to readers in the middle grade area. And so, yeah, that was really my jumping off point for that. I really wanted to be able to tell a story that just highlighted how joyful pride can be and how it can bring people together. So that was the inspiration for my first book. And then for my first YA book, I just wanted to write the most opposite thing compared to what I'd done before. My two middle grade books that came first are very happy, contemporary books, which I really, really love. I love being able to give happiness and joy to people, but I really wanted to go complete opposite for young adult, and I wanted to write my thrillers, and I wanted them to be as scandalous as possible. And nothing felt more scandalous to me than the royal family hiding secrets and trying to keep them behind the palace gates, but they start to leak out into the public one by one. And you've got a young king who's just taken the throne at only 17 years old, and he doesn't know who he can trust around him. It just felt like a really fun playground for me to write in. So yeah, I'm always looking for nice inspirations to go. Although I will say that calling that book The King is Dead was bad timing, because I mean, we had a lot of royal news at the time, and I was like, oh no, my book's going to get pulled from shelves. But thankfully, we flew under the radar. I just pretended that I hadn't written that book for 6 months, and it was fine. And then the second question was,
when do you take inspiration from other books? So you talked about pop culture and film and music. Yeah, are there any other books that you've sort of had a direct impact on your writing?
Yeah, I read a lot of books. I think it's always funny when you get asked about where you draw your inspiration from. Suddenly your mind goes completely blank. But I read a lot of books and I take inspiration from them all. And something that happens when you're an author is when you write a book and you give it to an agent and they try to sell it, you're often trying to point to other books that are maybe similar or sit in a similar lane to where your book sits. And it helps publishers kind of get an idea of where you want your book to sit in the market, where you want it to sit on the shelf, what kind of genre you want to be in. So the books that kind of get brought up a lot for my books, my young adult books, are A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson, which I think is kind of like the queen thriller book that sits above us all. You know, it's kind of the one that everyone wants to emulate or find the similar success, because it's a very successful book, sold millions of copies worldwide. And then I was about to say This Story's a Lie. That's my own book. One of Us is Lying. There we go. I was like, I know it's got lying in there somewhere. One of Us is Lying by Karen M. McManus is also, I think it's kind of like almost the American counterpart to A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. It's looked at as like pinnacle of YA thrillers. So those are kind of the two books that sit very closely to The King is Dead and How to Die Famous.
We're speaking to Karen McManus again on World Book Day. Just for anyone on the call who's not signed up yet, please do join us for that Q&A. Martha has asked, while we're talking about books, what's your favourite book?
Wow, my favourite book of all time. My favorite book of all time is, I have an adult book that is my favorite book of all time. I absolutely adore The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I just fall in love with it every time I read it. It's celebrity, it's scandal, it's a bit of journalism, which just all of my areas just put into one, which I love. On the young adult side, there's a fantasy book called Scythe by Neil Shusterman, I want to say off the top of my head. It's a trilogy of books, or a series of books, it's a fantasy story where humans don't die anymore, but they get Grim Reapers kind of go around and choose people to die, but otherwise people live forever. Really fantastic book. I absolutely adore that book. Noughts and Crosses, as I said, one of my favorites of all time. I also love The Great Gatsby, which I never thought I would say. When we read Great Gatsby in school, and I wasn't a fan. I think I pretended to have read it, which didn't go very well for my exams, so don't do that. But I remember being like, this book is bad. Why are we reading this book? And then when I left school, I read it again for some reason, and I was like, this is so good. Why did I hate it? So yeah, The Great Gatsby is definitely in there as well.
Thanks, that's a great point. I think I didn't get The Great Gatsby at school. I did it, I read it. It wasn't on an exam, but it didn't move me in any way. So, well, actually, that probably links quite nicely to Albert's next question. And we've got a great one from David as well, which we'll get to in a sec. But Albert's wondering, do you ever get bored of an idea you've had?
What I always say is, I won't say I get bored, because that sounds like I don't like my own books. But what I will say is that I tell every author, or aspiring author in particular, no matter how much or how good you think your idea is, or how much you love your idea, if you write the whole thing and you have to edit the whole thing, and then the book gets published, and then you have to promote the whole thing, there will be at least one time that you hate that book with your entire being. And I know that's not going to sound very inspirational, but it just means that, like, when you choose a book to write, if you want it to be published, if you don't, if you're just writing for yourself, then fine. But if you want the book to be published, you're going to be with that book for at least 2 years. That is writing, editing, promoting. And like, my first book came out in 2021. I started writing it in 2019. It's 2025 now. I still do events for that book. I still talk about that book. People still talk to me about that book. So that book is going to be with me forever, as are, I hope, all of my books. So you're with if you write a book, you're with that for a very, very, very long time. Therefore, don't write for anybody else but you. It's my biggest bit of advice to any aspiring author. I know it's very easy to walk into a bookshop and say, that book is selling so many copies. I want to write something like that because I want loads of money. That's all well and good. But if you're writing a book that you actually don't like, if you're trying to write the next Twilight, for example, and you don't like vampires or you don't like fantasy, but you're doing it because you think it will be what gets you in the door and gets you successful, makes you become an author, you will hate the entire writing process. You will find it difficult because it's not what you really want to do. So I always say, make sure that you pick an idea that you definitely love, that even on its worst day, you still love in some way. On the hardest day of writing something like House Die Famous, I struggled with writing on some days, but I knew that I really loved the story and I believed in the story, so it made it easier to push through. If I didn't, it would have been impossible to push through.
That's great advice. That's something that I was told as well when it came to like my degree or my dissertation as well. Like, make sure you enjoy it because it can be a long slog otherwise. We've got a question from David. Were you a journalist at any particular publication? You spoke about BuzzFeed. Were there any other organisations that you worked for, or any that you really wanted to work for?
So I was with BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed was my job from 2015 until 2022 when I left to be a full-time author. So I was there for 7 years. I write sometimes freelance for The Guardian now, not very often, but I do here and there. In terms of places that I would have wanted to work, I always wanted to work for one of the really like elite magazines that did the celebrity profiles, which meant that you could go to like the celebrity's house and like sit and chat to them. I know that sounds really I'm not doing it for the right reasons, because I'm a nosy person. I just like looking into other people's lives and peering into other people's homes in a non-creepy way. Like if I go to someone's house, I'm like, oh, this is so interesting. And sometimes you read like a Vogue interview or a GQ interview or an Elle interview or Harper's Bazaar or Vanity Fair, one of those, where the interviewer gets to just go for a walk with the celebrity. Like there was one recently where I think it was GQ, where they walked around Victoria Park in London with Paul Mescal, and I was like, that sounds great. I want to do that. I had one instance where I got to do it. I got invited to a Spice Girls house, which was very, very fun. That was actually as an author. I don't know why I never got to go as a journalist, but I got to go as an author, and it was just so interesting. So if I was to choose a publication that I would work for now, I would probably choose one of those big print magazines so that I could maybe do that.
Well, you have sold that to all of us there. I think that does sound fun. I'm assuming they invited you as a guest rather than a journalist because you weren't going to write about it afterwards. That might make the big difference.
I think I was kind of sworn to secrecy, but
Martha at Fairfield would like to know, which is your favourite book that you've written?
Favorite book that I've written. I think the one that leaps out at me the most is How to Die Famous. I think it's the book that is so me. It's celebrities, pop culture. It's an undercover journalist. It's Hollywood. It's everything that I really love in books and media and in TV, film, etc. So I think that's maybe my favorite. But I think my first book, Me, My Dad, and the End of the Rainbow, has a special place in my heart because it's my first book. You know, it's the one that made all of this happen in the first place. All of my books have, you know, a special place for one reason or another. And usually your latest one becomes your new favorite. So This Story Is a Lie is currently kind of leading the pack in terms of recency bias. But I think those two, House They're Famous and Me, My Dad, and the End of the Rainbow, are maybe my top children, so to speak.
We've had a really interesting question from Vihan. How necessary is lots of description and figurative language in your writing?
The best thing about being a writer is that style changes and style differs from writer to writer. Some writers love what we call purple prose, which is like flowery, descriptive writing, which really kind of immerses the reader and describes everything in stunning detail. But some writers are like, for want of a better word, like bare bones writers, that it's very sparse and very to the point. There's no waffling and there's no going around the houses to describe whatever's going on. It's really down to personal preference. I mean, I'm someone who I really love describing things because I find it leans into what I used to do when I was a teenager, which was there was no plot. I was just describing things. I would describe the sky for like 6 pages. And it was like my university tutor who was like, love what you're doing. It sounds great, but we haven't gone anywhere. So you need to start thinking of plot and dialogue. I don't think I wrote dialogue until I got to university. I think I just wrote about the sky and clouds and the sun. So if you are someone who wants to use descriptive writing in your work, go ahead, do so, but also be aware that you can't spend 2 pages describing one thing, because it might read as the best prose that's ever been written, but your reader will read it and say, okay, when does the story start? Where are we going from here? And I'm talking from experience because, like I said, I was a describing the sky for 6 pages kind of guy. So, but whatever your style, finding your own style is part of the fun of being an author. So whatever works for you.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to a question we sort of started on earlier. So it sounded like it was very easy for that first book to get published. Just talk us through the process of, you're a journalist, you've started work on a book. How does that book end up on the shelves? How does it end up in front of a publisher or an agent?
Yeah, I always lead by saying that I was very fortunate, I think. I know that I've got many friends who have been in the query trenches for years trying to get an agent even, and that's just the first step. For me, it was luck and timing, which, to be honest, I think is a lot to do with success as an author. Obviously, writing your books is what you can control, so write the best book that you can. But it comes down to, sometimes getting published does come down to luck and timing. And at the time, I was a journalist and I hadn't written anything creatively in probably 3 or 4 years at that point. I kind of dived into my job and I left creative writing behind, etc. And I was scrolling through Twitter. Don't let anybody tell you that social media is entirely bad. Sometimes it can do good. And I saw a post for a creative writing competition. It was a short story competition. It was 5,000 words. And I was like, oh, remember when you used to want to write a book? Maybe now's the time to revisit that. So I gave it a go. I actually did it wrong. So I misread the brief. The brief was pride. It was just one word, and it was to evoke a feeling of pride, etc., etc. I didn't read that, or maybe I did and I just ignored it, and I wrote about a serial killer, I think, which doesn't exactly evoke pride. So at the 11th hour, I had to change it because I reread the brief and realized I was completely wrong. So that was where the seed for Me, My Dad, and the End of the Rainbow started, because I was like, pride, what can I do? And I was like, pride is a celebration in London. Let's give that a go. And I wrote a young adult version of that book. There was an agent who was kind of observing the competition, and I didn't win. So there's no success story about me winning. I didn't win the competition. I wasn't even in the top 5. But one of the judges thought there was something in the work that was quite interesting, and so passed it on to the agent, who contacted me and asked if I'd ever thought about turning it into a book. And I was suspicious. I thought it was a scam. I can't lie. I was like, there is an agent in my inbox who is saying, well, do you want to turn your book into your story into a novel? And if you do, I will potentially represent you. But I gave it a go. I actually didn't want to write kids' books to begin with. I said to myself that that wasn't what I envisioned what I would do. I'd always imagined that I would do young adult books. But I decided to give it a go. I was like, do you know what? I'll write the first 3 chapters as a kids' book and see how it works. And it was the best piece of advice I ever got given, to make it a kids' book, because it naturally is a kids' book and I just hadn't seen that. It took me about 1.5 years to write the book from there. It was the first book I'd ever written from start to finish. And I gave it to this agent, and she called me in for a meeting and discussed where she saw the book going, how to edit it, and would I like representation. And I accepted. And thankfully, it was a time in publishing where there was a lot of questions arising about how progressive publishing actually was, and if they were doing enough to support stories from minority communities that weren't getting told. And it was a really tough conversation to be having. But at the time, I think publishing were really looking to diversify their lists and to really make it to put on to say that they were doing something for other people. And so my book kind of sold in less than 24 hours, I think, which was, it was quite a whirlwind. You know, some people, you go out on submission and you can be waiting for a year, and to go out and less than 24 hours later you've got an offer. It was very wild, so I'm glad that I had an agent to deal with that, because I would have just melted down to the floor. But yeah, it was a really nice, smooth journey to publication, and there's been some bumps in the road since then, and you know, you navigate obstacles as they come. But I was very, very lucky that I kind of had that introduction to publishing, and that it started my career. So yeah.
You just mentioned about obstacles there. So do you have any advice for young people who might face any challenges in their career journey?
To always know that, to always kind of stay, it's very cliche, but to stay true to what you want to do and to what you want to put out into the world. You, as an author, you're going to be told by every single person under the sun what they want in the book and what they envision for the book, and where they want your book to go. And only you really know what you want your book to do. So for example, like, an editor's job is to make the book as good as it can be, but they might envision that it has a different ending, or they might envision that it has a different beginning or a different main character. And sometimes they're right. Sometimes you agree with them and you're like, oh my God, of course I didn't see that. But sometimes you know in your heart that the story you want to tell is going in this direction. And so no matter what the obstacle is, whether it's other people saying that your book won't sell, or if it's doubt in your own mind, just to kind of stay true to what you want to be able to put out into the world, because at the end of the day, it's going to have your name on it. And when people don't like one of my books, they don't shout at the publisher. They come to me and say whatever they want to say. So yeah, to kind of just be proud of what you put out there, because you're kind of putting a bit of yourself out into the world, and you've got to be proud of that. So even when you know that books, you know, no one book is perfect. No one book is going to be something that every single person loves and gives 5 stars. But if you're proud of it, then I think that's the most you can ask for, and you kind of give it out into the world and you move on to the next book.
Well, and you've made it. I must mention this because it's an opportunity, obviously, for people to buy one of your books for World Book Day. So yeah, you've made it onto the World Book Day list for this year. I've got 2 questions, and I'm going to ask them together, if that's okay, because we are running out of time, and I do want to make sure we get through them.
Mm-hmm.
So just picking up from what you've just said there, Ms. Coop from Thurfield would like to know if there's a book you wish you'd written, and Martha would like to know what your favourite thriller book is. Now that might be the same answer for both, or there could be 2 different book recommendations there.
I actually think it could be the same book. I wish I'd written Ace of Spades by Farida Abike Amide. It's a thriller set in a boarding school, or a very, very privileged school. I wish I'd written it for 2 reasons. The first reason, it's just an incredible book. Farida, I'm thankful to be able to call her friends now. But that book is incredible. It's such a good thriller. It's so tense. It's got such good mystery behind it, and it's just done incredible things. And the second is that it sold for a lot of money. There was a lot of talk when that book got sold online, and I wish I'd had the idea before. I think that's there's no shame in saying that you wish you'd been the one to write the next Twilight or the next Hunger Games. So yeah, I wish I'd had that idea.
Before we move on to our final question, just wanted to ask about Romeo and Juliet, and whether you studied that at school, or you like it as a reader, as someone who watches the play.
I haven't read or watched Romeo and Juliet in a very long time. I think the last time I was in school. But I will say that in year 12, year 11, maybe year 12, I think, we had to write a retelling of a Shakespeare classic. It had to be a short story, but we had, or I think it was like an introductory scene to our own version of a Shakespeare play, and I chose Romeo and Juliet, and I wrote from the perspective of death, and I don't know why it sticks out in my. Well, I do. The reason it sticks out in my mind is because it's what got me into uni. When I applied to go to university, I had to give them a sample of my writing, because I was going to do an English and creative writing degree, and I gave them the sample of the Romeo and Juliet retelling that I'd done. It was maybe 1,500, 2,000 words, from the perspective of death, but in the retelling of Romeo and Juliet. And it was the first thing that I wrote where I felt super proud. And then when it kind of landed me my place, I got a call from one of the tutors who'd pretty much said that my application was fine, but it was the story that had got me my place. And if I got the grades, then there was a place waiting for me. So Romeo and Juliet has kind of kickstarted this whole thing. So I would not have got my job at BuzzFeed if I hadn't got my degree. So yeah, maybe I owe a lot to William Shakespeare.
Our final question then, do you have any final advice for the young people on the call or your younger self around achievements or success?
It's never as linear as you think it will be. It's never as straightforward as you hope it will be. Sometimes it is. Sometimes the dream happens where you're 21 and you write a book and you get paid £1 million and it gets a film deal. Sometimes that happens. There are people, Beth Recalls, who wrote The Kissing Booth, was 17 when she wrote The Kissing Booth. And then suddenly it was picked up by Penguin. It was turned into a Netflix film, all while she was trying to study at university. So it happens. But it's not the biggest likelihood. The likelihood is that the majority of us, I would say 98% of us, write and we write and we write and we continue to work towards what we want. And there's something that is to be said for not to be said for not thinking that everything happens straight away and not giving up as a result. There are many times where I could have given up because something didn't go the way I wanted it to, or didn't go the way that I'd planned. And knowing that there are authors out there whose big book, the book that changes their life, that changes their career, that changes everything about them. For some authors, it's their 10th book, their 20th book. For some authors, they're 50, they're 60, they're 70. Some people write their first book in their 50s. Knowing that you don't have to achieve everything by the time you are 25. I used to say that I wanted to have written the next Hunger Games by the time I was like 23, and I wanted to be a millionaire by the time I was 25. Great dreams to have. Work towards them by all means. But if it doesn't happen, keep doing what you can to work towards that and focus on what you can control. You can't control how many people buy your book, but you can control writing another book and keeping working towards what you want. So don't compare success to people that have already reached that pinnacle.
Which must be so difficult if you're spending any time at all with celebrities, right? But oh, thank you so much for this, Ben. We've got more questions. We'd love to ask them, but unfortunately, this is about to be all we've got time for today. We want to let everyone get away on time. So thank you so much for your time and talking us through your career and your books and reading recommendations. Yeah, that's been brilliant. I think I'm off after this, Sophie, to try and rewrite Romeo and Juliet, because that is actually a really great writing activity. I enjoy the idea of that. Just checking, I think it was University of Manchester that was, Ben. I've got a question just in the chat.
I went to Manchester Metropolitan University, MMU.
There we go. Right. Obviously somebody dropped that in as a question. So yeah, thank you so much for your time. Back over to you, Sophie.
Yeah, thank you, Ben, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Thanks for all your brilliant questions. A feedback form will be shared with you soon via email, and we'd really love to hear your thoughts. We hope to see you at our other sessions for Cuts Both Ways as well, which are all on screen now. And as a bonus for this term, by registering for and attending a session for Hero Read 2, you will be automatically entered into a competition to win a free bundle of books for your schools. We're giving them away to 20 schools, which is very exciting. Please head to our NTBC webpage for more information about our sessions and to register your groups. You can also find more broadcasts on the Speakers for Schools website. Thank you, everyone, and we hope you enjoyed the session. We'll see you again soon.